All right, so after weeks of intense electoral battle, Australia's opposition leader Anthony Albanese has now claimed victory in the country's national election. This, of course, came after the incumbent Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison finally conceded defeat following the election results. The Labour Party will now return to power after having been in opposition for over 9 long years. And Scott Morrison's defeat comes after the pandemic-hit nation Australia witnessed an inflation of about 5.1%. Now, Albanese is the leader of the Australian Labour Party, slated to become the country's 31st Prime Minister. He has served as a Member of Parliament in Australia since 1996. He was the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia back in 2013 and also served as a Cabinet Minister from 2007 till 2013. In his victory speech, the Australian Prime Minister-elect Albanese has pledged to bring Australians together, saying that he will lead a government that is worthy of the people of Australia. He's also vowed to make Australia a renewable energy superpower and effectively fight climate crisis.
I want to seek our common purpose and promote unity and optimism, not fear and division. It is what I have sought to do throughout my political life and what I will bring to the leadership of our country. It is a show of strength to collaborate and work with people, not weakness. I want to find that common ground where together we can plant our dreams. To unite around our shared love of this country, our shared faith in Australia's future, our shared values of fairness and opportunity, and hard work and kindness to those in need.
No, it was a pretty quick decision on Scott Morrison's part to step down as the Prime Minister, despite millions of votes yet to be counted, because the country needs an immediate leader to represent Canberra at the Tokyo summit on Tuesday. Now, Scott Morrison, meanwhile, has also decided to step down as the leader of the country's Liberal Party, and this means that the party will now need to hold a separate election for the next party chief.
On the 21st of May, what you're making is environmentally sustainable.
Yeah. So they've got an hour and a half of downtime on their really fast line.
I, as leader, take responsibility for the wins and the losses. That is the burden and that is the responsibility of leadership. And as a result, I will be handing over the leadership at the next party room meeting to ensure that the party can be taken forward under new leadership, which is the appropriate thing to do.
Can you just go back?
Meanwhile, there is no clarity on the formation of the new government yet. It'll be very interesting to see whether the Labour Party will choose a coalition government or will wait to cross the majority mark on its own. With nearly about 67% of the votes having been counted so far, the Labour Party has grabbed about 72 seats, while Morrison's coalition has managed to get about 50-odd seats. Meanwhile, the Independents and the Greens have managed to get about 15-odd seats. The House of Representatives has a total of 151 seats. 76 is the magic number that is needed to form a clear majority government. And there are still a few seats that are up for grabs. Scott Morrison, meanwhile, has extended his very best wishes to successor for the upcoming term. And also the Indian Prime Minister was quick to take to Twitter to congratulate the new Prime Minister-elect, saying that India is, of course, looking forward to work together in further strengthening the strategic partnership between India and Australia. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of what this election's victory, of course, means for the new Prime Minister-elect Anthony Albanese and also what it means for the Australian politics in general. We're joined in by Professor John Blackstone, who is joining us live at this moment from Australia. Now, Mr. Blackstone, this has been a very interesting election. Scott Morrison was a Prime Minister who had said that he believed in miracles, because in 2019 he was expected to lose, but he actually managed to win. But this time round, he seems to have run completely out of luck. What do you make of this election?
Yeah, no, it is a very interesting turn. Very clear that the 3 years of miracles ran out in this election last night. Essentially, what we saw was a government that had been running on a degree of, good luck and good degree of good management in terms of handling the COVID pandemic, but not inspiring the people enough over a range of issues that have been on the agenda for some time now in terms of women's rights, equality, the treatment of Indigenous Australians, the environment especially. And while the policy differences have been on the surface quite minor, there has been a tonal difference that's been quite marked, and that's allowed space for the Labor Party to take this lead. But it's important to note that there's a large rump of the Australian electorate that's unhappy with both the Labor, the centre-left party and the coalition centre-right, which is the Liberal National Coalition. Right. But what clearly lost out here was the Liberal National Coalition.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, I just want to dwell a bit more in terms of, what has led to Scott Morrison actually losing this election. He was seen as a leader who was absent during the moment of crisis, especially when, those images of him being heckled. When he went to visit those communities who'd been affected by the bushfires in Australia, those images are very telling and must have played in the minds of the Australian people when they went out to vote. Why was Scott Morrison, despite the fact that, he seemed to have a good image internationally, within Australia, he was seen as a leader who was absent during Australia's moment of crisis?
So there were some really unhelpful moments when he went on holidays to Hawaii during the bushfires, and he, in contrast to his predecessor as Prime Minister Tony Abbott, 2x2, who was actually an active fireman, declared, I don't hold a hose during the fires, which was it spoke to an apparent disregard for being able to put an elbow to the wheel, and to actually pick up the hose and do that extra lifting. That really didn't resonate very well with the Australian electorate. But there were other issues too, in particular in terms of the way women's rights and the respect of women in Parliament, women who have been subject to sexual assault, and women who have been abused. There was a kind of a sense of a slightly cavalier approach to this from the government under Scott Morrison that led to a significant backlash with what they call now the teal movement, which is a cross between the colour blue and the colour green. And you get people who are environmentally conscious, fiscally conservative, but actually tend to be quite strong on women's issues. Right. And many of those are actually women who won their electoral, the outcomes for their elections.
Absolutely, indeed. And also tell us a bit about the new Prime Minister-elect, Anthony Albanese. He, at this point of time, you're given to understand, has got about 76 members in the Australian Parliament, where the magic number is 76. He's got 72. Do you think in the vote count that is still to happen, he can actually get to that number of 76 that he needs to get complete majority?
Yeah, look, there's about a dozen seats that are undecided. So if he gets 1/3 of that dozen or so seats, he is in a safe place. Most pundits are now suggesting he's got a strong chance of getting 76, possibly 77. And if 76 is the magic number, obviously, 77 gives him a slight buffer. But amongst the independents, there is a large number of recently newly elected representatives who are, philosophically sympathetic to his views and likely are going to be fairly accommodating to him in terms of Labor Party policy priorities. So I think he's going to be in a reasonably comfortable position to implement policies. In Australia, of course, we've got a two-house, a bicameral system. The Senate represents the states with an equal number of senators per state. That is a different equation. There we see the balance of power not held by the government, but by what they call a crossbench. And in that space, the government will require considerable negotiating skills to get through its agenda. But the broad nature of the agenda is such that it is highly likely to be successful, because the broad tenor of the election outcome is that of support of the differences between the coalition, the Conservative coalition, and the Labor Party, particularly, as I say, on women's issues,
right,
on Aboriginal rights, and so on.
All right, and I also, Professor Blackstone, want you to weigh in on the difference perhaps in the foreign policies that we can expect. Now, Scott Morrison was someone who was seen to be very closely leaning towards the Americans. He took Australia to be a member of the AUKUS. And is there any change that we can expect in terms of how the new Prime Minister-elect, Anthony Albanese, is likely to approach this issue?
So I think there's a strong parallel with the election of Bob Hawke nearly 40 years ago in March 1983. He was a union man, but he saw the significance of the alliance with the United States. He was very keen to assure the Americans that Australia was going to remain an ally. And it's been very clear also that with Anthony Albanese and the Penny Wong, his shadow foreign minister and now foreign minister designate, and the national security team with the Labor Party, they've been very eager to avoid the appearance of being different from the coalition. But what, in terms of the policy positions, but what is different is the tone that they're taking. And I think this is where a fresh face, a fresh set of incumbents provides an opportunity for revisiting the relationship particularly with France, which was obviously damaged over the AUKUS deal, over the nuclear propulsion submarines, and of course the prospect of just recalibrating the relationship with China. Although they have not taken a different policy position, the rhetoric has been different, and that's, I think, a significant inflection point.
Absolutely. That's something that we'll, of course, watch out very closely for. And Professor Blackstone, my last question to you is, how much of a challenge is economy going for the new Prime Minister-elect? Because at this point of time, you're given to understand that inflation rate in Australia is over 5%, and Anthony Albanese will have to hit the ground running to, in fact, deal with it.
So he has a significant agenda for innovation and for developing industry in Australia, and capitalising on what we already have in terms of excellent export opportunities. So there is some opportunity there to actually develop significantly at home, some homegrown industries to increase employment opportunities. But of course, Australia is subject to the buffeting of international trade. We are a major exporting country, and China, of course, still imports a lot of its iron ore and coal and other material from Australia. So the international dynamics of raw materials trade is something that Australia will be subject to. And it looks still, though, reasonably optimistic into the medium term for Australia on that front.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Blackstone, for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.